Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I am your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Scribe. Joining us is another author on the podcast. He has a published author of the Traveler trilogy about time travel and history, coming all the way from Australia for the first time on the podcast. Joining us is author Rob. Rob, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Excellent. So, Rob, what can you tell us about yourself? Tell us who you are.
I live in Australia. I am a semi-retired media marketing professional, I guess. I've done a few things. I've just got married, so there you go.
Congratulations!
Thank you. And we live in the mountains behind Australia's quite famous Gold Coast beach region. So we've decided to take a green change, and I'm very fortunate then to have the time to be able to do some writing and pursue a few hobbies as well.
Nice. And as a nice transition into writing, tell us about your Traveler series. How did that all come about, and what do you hope people to take away from or know about the Traveler trilogy?
The first book, which is called Traveler Inceptio, and I might add to each of you who might be writers, you know the absolute pain that it can be in choosing a name, because you've got to get one that hasn't been done before. Essentially, I go by the premise of how would you survive if you were taken 1,000 years in the past? And unlike a lot of popular media, not everyone speaks Southern Californian. So how would you survive? How could you survive? And then what if there was a device that could take a person 1,000 years in the past? And then if it was kept in the public domain, how would it be used? So Traveler Inceptio talks about a team of special forces who are gathered together to train them, especially so they can research into Saxon England. And remember too, 1,000 years ago was a time where there's a big gap in knowledge. So as far as historical researchers go, to send somebody back 1,000 years in the past to research would be a boon. So because Traveler Inceptio received a lot of positive feedback, and there were a lot of reader requests for sequels, which wasn't something I had really thought about. Though it does lend itself for a sequel, I then wrote the next book, which was Traveler Probo, which means to prove. And then the last is Traveler Manifesto, which is you have to end it somewhere. So that's the three books, and they look at a modern person or a modern researcher being sent back to various different places at the same time, because the device can't send any further back than 1,000 years. And that's the premise of the story. That's my elevator speech.
Nice. And if I'm not mistaken, are those the books in question right behind you? Is that what I see right behind you?
Oh, yes. They're my books there. So.
Nice. Well, show us the cover of the first book. I see that. Let's show the audience what it looks like.
Okay, that's it's as far as my vision goes, it's coming out backwards, but there you go. But that's Traveler Inceptio. Inceptio is Latin for begin. And Latin because at the time in Europe, the lingua franca, or the most commonly spoken language that most educated people could understand, was Latin.
Right.
And the cover is actually a sax, or it's the popular knife for the Saxons at the time. Ooh. And it's actually a real one made by a blacksmith in England. So that's the book there. The second is Traveler Probo. And I try and change the covers by virtue of the area or the place that it's talking about. So Traveller Probo is more talking about the Byzantine Empire, which is around Istanbul, around 1000 in the early 11th century. So, excuse me. Imagine if you could be placed into that empire, which was the flower of civilization at the time. And then the third is Traveller Manifesto, which looks at interactions with the Roman Empire, which isn't 1,000 years in the past, but without being a spoiler, they managed to do something there so that, and there's a secret mission put together by the Americans and the Israelis to research Jerusalem and the civilization earlier than that. So that's got the little Roman picture there.
Ooh, I like that.
Thank you. I do have a fourth novel, which has been, which is totally outside of the Traveller universe. That's called Quantum Crystal.
Nice.
And what Quantum Crystal is, it's what if there was a treatment that could treat PTSD and the TBI, or the traumatic brain injury, that affects so many in the forever wars in the Middle East, and also in our civilization, in our own civilization, through violence or car accidents and that sort of thing. And it talks about the other effects that treatment might have. So it's again sci-fi. It's outside of the time travel concept. It looks at what if it changes brains, and there you go. There's a little bit of what I do. I do have another book that's in the process of being published right now, and that's called Drowned Paradise. And yeah, my spiel on that is, what if a 25-meter tsunami hit Australia's Gold Coast, and what if all the tech was gone, and what if it wasn't just there, but so it's from a survivor's perspective, and then what happens 50 years later. So again, another quirky, that's my disaster book sort of thing.
But those are actually really, really interesting. I actually went on the website, your website, just to get a quick glimpse of the Traveller trilogy, and just from the few snippets I was able to read, I'm invested now. As I said last time, I am going to buy these books, and I especially like the covers of the German the Saxon knife, the Byzantine sword, and the Roman helmet, and I think that's either the Peugeot dagger or one of the swords of Rome, but the covers look amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Any author would agonize over what to put as the cover, and I certainly do. That one. The funny thing is, a lot of the readers of my books are women, and a lot of them have given a very positive feedback, because there is a little bit of romance, and it certainly wasn't planned that way when I started writing. But I look at the limitations of the covers as being too male-centered, but that's just me over-analyzing everything. So
Nice. So when you began writing your first book, what was your initial need or desire for your potential readers, and has that changed going forward after the trilogy and into your other books?
Well, when I have been active in writing most of my life, but mostly that was for business or for media. I was engaged in, then I had my own business. I had a business partner who turned out to be crooked. So I was having a dark time, and I was sitting on the beach thinking, how am I going to survive? And then my mind went to the buildings that were near the beach, and I thought, well, how was this looking 200 years ago, when Australia was first settled, and then how did it look 1,000 years ago? And then I thought about, well, how could anyone survive really 1,000 years ago? And the story started from there. And as far as motivation goes, it seemed I've always loved history, and my father is a genealogist, and
Ooh, okay.
so we have a quite an extensive family history that he's researched, and my mind I went to that, and then a story that had to be told, and it just became. I just started to write. Must have been therapy of some sort, but so that story developed, and then I saw the need for research, and because I'm absolutely fanatical that any story can be possible, can be plausible. People's reactions are as realistic as I can imagine them to be, and the situation to be realistic. So I try and take a very sensible way of taking a fairly outlandish claim. What if you could go back 1,000 years, and then how would people really react? What would their what problems would they meet along the way?
Right.
And that's where I go from there.
Nice. It's actually really interesting because if you look at like that, like the whole time travel, um, what's the word, time travel plot line for a lot of other stories, it's been used countless times, but we still enjoy it.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
think what you may agree with is it's a very effective plot line, but some would say it's kind of like maybe a little predictable. So you have to kind of
yes,
reinvent it. And I think what you're doing with the Traveler trilogy is something incredibly unique because, as you say, you're trying to look at this as the most accurate way possible. Because as we see in time travel movies and books, a lot of the characters in the past, of course, if it's like film, they speak English. But
yes,
if this was realistic, they wouldn't. They would
yeah,
speak the language at the time. They would speak Latin, or if you were in Greece, they would speak the Greek language. If you were in um, Korea, you would have to speak the Korean dialect at the time.
at the
It's
time, yeah,
yeah, it's incredible, and I definitely think, as you mentioned before, that kind of research is not easy. So when you finished writing the initial first draft of the first book,
yeah.
what was the initial feedback like? Did you tell anyone that you finished it, or did you kind of wait until it was fully completed, edited and all, and then waited for feedback?
A little bit of both. Along the way, for my own, I think, affirmation, I did have a couple of friends who were reading what I was writing, um, and they offered some editorial advice, but at the same time, I think for me it was mostly about making sure that the story was coherent. Um,
Right.
then I did put my completed manuscript, uh, which was rather long. It was 250,000 words,
Wow.
and it got sent to a very well-established English um, editor who did the equivalent of tearing off my arm and beating me over the head with it. And
Ooh.
so I had to dry my tears and knock a whole pile of words off and be a little bit more concise in my writing, which was great for me because so my books are longish. They are described as being good meaty books where with and these aren't my words, excellent character development and and some people say surprised, they're actually pretty good. So the thing is, my first book, yes, it was heavily edited, um, and that's good for me as a writer too, because often you get tied up in the research and everything else, and realize that a couple of the stories you put in as backstories or whatever aren't really necessary. And so following that, um, the feedback I got was outstandingly good, and whether it be through Amazon or whether it be through somebody who gave the book to somebody else and that sort of thing. And the question was, well, you can't leave it there. And so that was the reason for the next book. And essentially, I wrote the second and the third books as a fairly continuous project because it became apparent that you couldn't really finish the story just with one other book. It had to be two. And so taking my interest in history and the interest in the interactions of humans today, popular media, how would such a project be received by, say, the social media? So there would be a lot of interest from people who would be, say, wanting to see what happened to these guys who got sent back in the past, and that's how it goes. Yeah.
Wow, that's actually pretty cool. It's almost like, yeah, I completely 100% with everything you say about the whole process of writing and then finishing one book and then with the feedback being so positive, writing a second book. It's like, I didn't plan for this to be a trilogy, but okay,
Yeah.
got to go back to the drawing board and make a whole new outline that follows through that makes sense. What I think is also pretty fascinating and also really cool. And then kind of going back to the readership, um, did you initially want to write for readers like you, or did you necessarily write for yourself? That this is a book you would want to read?
I think a bit of both. I am quite, and have been perhaps in the past much more of an avid reader. I mean, so the as you mentioned about the time travel genre, I haven't really been a huge follower. In fact, a lot of the time travel stories that I've written that I've read have been read after I finished Traveller Inceptio. For example, Timeline by Michael Crichton.
Right.
And I think any writer sort of lives with a paranoia that, oh my God, I hope nobody's writing exactly the same story at exactly the same time, or that the story has been written before, I've read it, I haven't realized it, and have gone to write my own version of it. So for me, it was about a story that had to be written. There was this strange motivation in me to get it going, and because of my own paranoia, I really needed to make sure that the information in there was correct, and to try and be a better author, which incidentally, it's like a mountain. One doesn't fall there. You actually end up getting better each time.
Right.
But for me, it was really about I think I wasn't market driven, is what I'm saying. I was writing a story that was of interest to me and hoped that others found it interesting. The initial response was very positive, and I must admit it would have been a book that I would have read. So I had to take it from there. So it's not a children's book. It's not a young adult, really. It's an adult's book.
Right.
Because of my quest for reality and because I'm Australian, there's probably a bit of swearing in it. In fact, there is, but it's not overladen. I mean, you're dealing with a bunch of military guys
Right.
who are training for something that they may not even do. So in the military, guys swear at each other quite a bit. But the whole approach was hoping that people enjoyed it. And for me, the greatest joy as an author is when somebody reads your work and say, hey, that's good, I really enjoyed it, because I look at it like an investment in time.
Right.
And in that investment, if somebody enjoys that investment in time, it's worthwhile.
Yeah, and I think what you brought up is a really good point that I don't think a lot of upcoming authors really consider is the whole market craze. I remember a good friend of mine told me sort of like the positives, but also the dangers of the market craze when if there's one major book that's like say on the New York Times bestseller, everyone wants to read it and everyone wants to write in that same genre. But
Yes.
like all trends, they soon trickle away and a new one takes its place. And there
Yes.
is like a danger to that, because if you're just writing for the market trend, are you really writing for yourself, or you're just writing just to meet something? And I think for all upcoming authors, yes, you do have to look at the marketability of your book if it is going to be well received, but that
Yes.
shouldn't be necessarily the main thing. You have to think of, okay, you're putting a lot of time, money, and effort into this. It is an investment. And is it going to be positive for you, or is it going to be not positive for you? So I think that's something that
Exactly.
has to be really considered. And one thing that I've always aspired to as an author going forward is, one of my friends mentioned two major important things to me, which is writers are liars, cheaters, and thieves. And she expressed it to me. It's like, well, what do you mean? She said, we are thieves because we steal from each other. We're always taking like a similar plot. We are liars because we make stuff up. And cheat is we cheat people out of time. I mean, to read a very hefty book or very condensed or meaty book, that does take a lot of time for someone to truly,
Does.
truly read it and to enjoy it. If someone reads it and they don't understand it in the first 50 pages, that's not good. So it does take a lot of crafting on the author's part to really make sure, if you do want it to be as long as you want it to be, it does have to make sense. But then
Yeah.
that goes into what I call the three E's: educate, entertain, and enlighten, especially if you're doing like historical fiction, historical fantasy, because you do want to educate people on something that they may not have known. You definitely do
Yes.
want to entertain them, because that is the main job of the author, is to entertain its reader, but also enlighten them, to really make them think or reevaluate something about themselves or about a topic that's been discussed. And I think those two are really, really important
Good
to
points.
consider.
Yeah. No, that is a good point. Um, your comment about the genre too, and about everybody wanting to copy that genre, we could project that to every author's nemesis, which is publishers as well.
Oh,
Publishers
yes.
will want either a successful author to write 10 more books on the same kind of thing, um, or they will want other people to write that book, because what they're after is sales, and we understand that, and that's the changing face of the publishing industry. But
Right.
yeah, I liked your points about the three E's. Very good.
Definitely. So after writing the trilogy and almost like kind of like a reflection of your work, have you ever thought of, why I initially started this in the beginning? You may have done it before, and how has it ultimately changed going forward? Because to write a trilogy of books, that's not easy. Writing a book and getting off the ground, that's not easy as well. But to dedicate a time or years to write a trilogy, or sometimes
Yeah,
even like a whole series, we've seen authors write maybe 15 to 20 books. That's almost a lifetime they've
yeah.
dedicated to their craft. So, what has kept you going all these years writing? What still motivates you? And is it the same motivation that you had when you took up that pen and pencil, or just got in front of a computer and just started dibby dabbling?
Well, I think when I started writing, I did it with a large degree of terror, because I was terrified that it was rubbish. I was terrified that people wouldn't like it, and I was terrified that that what I was saying was a load of excreta, so to speak. So the fact that somebody likes it is the enormous uh, incentive, and then to continue writing was largely because others were interested in seeing what happened. In fact, it's quite funny. I've got an electrician who we were talking about books, and he said, "Oh, he likes Dune and those sorts of things."
Oh, Dune, the Lord of the Rings of science fiction.
Yeah. So I told him about my books, and he said, "Oh, I'll read one." So he got the first one, and then all he does is talk about it. And so when he got the second one, he's been handing them around to friends, and he talks about, oh, this is a good scenario, like he's making up his own sort of scenario in my Traveller universe, which is quite funny. But when you get somebody like that, you go, man, this is incentive, because when somebody's excited about what you write about, regardless of what the topic is,
Right.
the incentive is that, well, somebody actually gets it, somebody likes it. And he's funny, because now, even with he's asked me, are there going to be any more books in the Traveller universe? And I'm kind of maybe, there is room for me to do something. But so the main incentive there is that when somebody enjoys what you're writing, it makes me more inclined to want to write. And more stories are popping into my head all the time.
Another danger and consequence of being a writer, you never stop thinking.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And, jotting notes, or when you're somewhere, writing notes in your phone, that sort of thing. So, yeah, it is rather an interesting one.
Yeah, it is. And actually, what you brought up actually just reminded me of my own writing. When I actually started writing my first book when I was getting my master's degree in the States. And I initially started writing this back all the way in my undergrad, but I never finished it. And after reading so much and developing it, I finally got it off the ground. And it was entitled initially The Chosen, or The Summoning, where it's like Magnificent Seven meets Lord of the Rings, where you have seven
Right.
characters from different historical periods. Like you have a Spartan, a Roman, an early Celt, a Viking, a knight, a samurai, and a Mohawk Indian time travel to this fantasy world, and they are pretty much have to liberate these people from this time traveling sorcerer who's from the present day in modern times, who's kind of
Right.
taken over. And when I first finished writing it, the feedback was incredible, and it's like, okay, now what do I do from here? And I didn't have an initial idea of what to do, but then I decided, let me do some what ifs for some of the major characters. And that became a whole genre on its own. And then I took a story not related to this series, but I name dropped them as a cool little reference. And one person said, oh, are these the actual original people? It's like, nope. It's like, wait a minute. Let me actually use that. So now that my first initial attempt at writing, and this was when I was in middle school, I'm
Right.
now redeveloping it to be the prologue story of this series of The Summoning. And that's just crazy. And I all had to give it
Excellent.
back to, thank you, to all the writers of like the past that I've read, Brian Jacques of the Red Wolf trilogy, J.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis. They've all impacted my own writing and my own voice. So kind of almost towards you, what authors growing up have impacted your writing and how you approach characters and the words of literature?
Um, from a young age, I had a real passion for science fiction. So people like Arthur C. Clarke, and I've got just 1 second. I've got a few people here that I've got on my list, because I knew that if I was asked that question, I'd even forget their names. You know how it is. But
Right.
So like as an adult, I've really enjoyed George Orwell.
Ooh,
Of
nice.
course, because of his perception. There's an Australian author called Colleen McCulloch, who has an excellent series on Rome, who is a very good, and her books are really hefty, but
Ooh.
they're brilliant. I don't think they'll ever make a Netflix series out of them, because they'd be just too expensive to put together. I even like people like J.K. Rowling, just for the storytelling,
Yes.
creating a whole new universe, which is brilliant, and rightly so. She's done very well with it. Andy Weir, I love the
Oh, I know
Martian.
that name. That name sounds familiar.
Yeah, he's the one who wrote The Martian. And
Ah,
then,
okay.
but there are others. I try to be a little bit. eclectic in my topics. Sometimes I'll just see a topic and I'll go, I love it. Let's read it. So I do give it a go. There's Jan Martel, who wrote The Life of Pi. I liked his first half of that book because of his beautiful writing style. And another one is there's Gregory David Roberts, who wrote the book Shantaram, which is just taken off on somewhere, not on Netflix, but the Shantaram is about an Australian prisoner who escapes prison and then escapes to India, and then how he becomes enmeshed in Indian culture. So really clever writers who've written some beautiful things. There's another author too. What's her name? The Doomsday Book by, I've forgotten now. Anyway, sorry about that. And then there's another historical writer called Bernard Cornwell who has.
I read it in high school.
Yes, but so there's science fiction on one hand and there's history on the other, and it seems that my interests have bled through into my own writing style.
Yeah. Nice. And it's actually good you brought up Bernard Cornwell, because he was actually the first author I started reading for historical fiction. And I've watched the Last Kingdom series on Netflix. It's still my favorite show. I love it. Watched Vikings on History Channel, and then the series successor, Vikings Valhalla, which season 2 is coming. So I can't wait to see that. And I just love writing and just reading about history and historical fiction, because it opens my own understanding to things I never knew about. And I think that's the beautiful thing when it comes to writing about history. But I'm also very staunch and critical on, if you're writing historical fiction, even if it's alternate history, yes, you do have to be fictitious, but you have to be as accurate as possible. Because I think you can agree, there are some good alternative historical fictions that are good, but then there are some that are like really way out there. And I think a lot of people will agree the most iconic one is Guns of the South by Harry Turtledove.
Yes, I haven't read that one. Is it excellent?
Well, I think it was the book that propelled the genre of alternative history, because it is, what if the South got AK-47s by sympathizers of the South in present time, gave it to them, and Robert E. Lee was able to, not in a sense, kind of win the war, but an engine of a stalemate where pretty much the South was a separate country from the Union. And that propelled a different book series, which is called The Great Divide, where you had the North and the South still separate, but going into World War I and World War II, it's very different. Like the Union allied itself with Austria and the German Empire, and the enemies are the South, UK, and France, which is huge. And pretty much we almost kind of have like our own purge in that timeline, where if you aren't white, according to the book, you're automatically exterminated. So it's like, oh, we're literally doing World War II and World War I. So it's very interesting. But then again, that's like that whole really, really extreme fictitious genre, which actually kind of leads me into another question, which is, I know I mentioned before that your book kind of almost reminds me of Timeline by Michael Crichton, but how does that almost like make you feel? Like, I know some authors say, oh, it's good being compared to an author of the past, but some would take a sense that it's like, it's nice being a part of it, but I don't want to be seen as like a successor to Timeline. I want to be like my own voice. So what's your take on that discussion?
I hadn't read Timeline until after I'd completed my my first book. Excuse me.
No problem.
And I guess what I like being compared in writing style, but not in the writing content. So when you look at things like Timeline, excuse me, I'll just cough. excuse me,
No problem.
timeline, Outlander. um, they you can write in a genre without being taking their story. Some reviewers have actually suggested that my approach to the time travel genre is totally different because I put severe limitations on things. And in my first book, some of my characters do discuss the various different time travel theories in relation to, the butterfly effect and all those others.
Right.
And the what I conclude in order to keep me sane is to make sure that if you go back in time, you might nothing's changed here. So do you change another timeline, or
Right.
do you just did what you did happen in the past and is just not known? And I covered something called uparts, and uparts are out of place artifacts. So that's where you find something in archaeology which doesn't make sense.
Right.
So that's also covered. So I kind of get out of that by saying, well, it doesn't matter if you send a mission back in time because it's not shown in today's history, because it always interacted at a time when, one, there was too much happening, or two, it was so isolated from the mainstream of events that that it wasn't seen. So that's my get out of jail free on that one.
Nice.
But I've tried to cover it my way, and as I said, there's an enormous paranoia at first that others had done that, but it seems by people who've read a lot more on the topic than I have that that's not the case. But I think any book has the potential for covering other stories, and I try very, very hard not to do what anyone else has done. But again, there's so many books out there I haven't read, so
Right. I completely agree. I mean, that is like the big challenge of trying to write something that's new and inventive in a way. It's like in a genre, like you almost all the same stories have been written countless times by different authors, but just as their own unique twist. And I think that's the unique twist that really makes an author shine. So another example, like when I decided to do almost like a time travel, almost like what you kind of did, it was for one of my characters who's a Greek, and he actually goes back in time, back home to when he was taken, which was the Battle of Plataea, where the Greeks fought against the Persians. Now, we know from history that the Spartans and the Athenians, they beat the Persians and they kick them out, and that kind of slowly begins to die the Achaemenid Empire. Well, what happens if that changes? What happens if not only the 300 surrendered and allied themselves with the Persians? What if that whole battle was changed differently? So that's what I looked at this character, where you're now seeing the eyes of Greece being fully Persianized, and the main character is the bodyguard of Artaxerxes, one of the sons of Xerxes the first. And that was a whole thing, especially the language. I think you could agree with this for travelers, which is the language research. Research for like the character clothing, the huts, the homes, what they may have ate, and how they would have ruled. That's a little bit easy, but when you're looking at the language of the people of the past, it's a lot harder, especially if you go to classical period, especially if it's like Persian. We don't know what they possibly would have said or what their alphabet was. So we can only make a educated guess. And I went with the route of, until I did more research, which was modern Persian, and just simply translate that. But even that was not easy, because just a quick twist of like an American or English word can derail the entire meaning. So have you come across that when you did your research for like the language of Latin for the characters?
Yeah. One of the again, I had the storyline for the first book, Traveller and Septio, looks at
Hmm.
one of the special forces guys sent back to Saxon England, and as a part of their training, they're trained in Latin, and they are taught what we understand to be the English of the time, which turned out to be totally useless when you're trying to speak it. And the only way he managed to get by was because he met some monks, and they spoke Latin. He was able to communicate with Latin, and through them learn the language of the location. Because again, when we look at language, let's say in Saxon times, um, a lot of the language that was written by, say, scholars might have been totally different to the language spoken by the people living in the
Right.
forest. So, so it would be extremely difficult for a person being sent back 1,000 years to understand what the heck was being taught. I had the same similar issues with the team that was sent back to the Byzantine Empire in Book 2, which is Traveller Probo, and that is a mission acting on the assumption that the first mission was successful.
Mhm.
And they were compelled to learn the Greek of the time, because even though they were called Romans and they were Romans, they called themselves Romans. They ended up speaking Greek.
Right.
So again, it's about learning the language, and then only by being there could you possibly learn some of the little tricks and some of the slang and all the rest. It would be an enormous challenge.
Yeah. And kind of leading on to like the challenges, what books would you say that you've glanced at or read have like pushed you to be a better writer in terms of like character development, story structure, imagery, language? What authors or books kind of push you to continue to be better?
A couple that I looked at as far as story development and character development, I think the uh, the books on Rome by Colin McCulloch were very, very good character development, very, very good as far as historical fiction. Um, the as another one that caused me to look at um, the story itself was the Doomsday book by um, Colleen Wills or something like that,
All right.
um, which which again, it's about how would you really react in that position rather than the glamorized, romanticized like Outlander or something like that, um, because because it's all about. I look at it like you're dealing with people.
Right.
So how would people react? How would these people react when faced with somebody from our time? You step back into time, and even though um, these special forces guys are dressed as best we know and everything else, their teeth are perfect. There are very few physical deformities because physical deformities in our civilization are fixed from birth.
Right.
Um, so the I look at it like this warrior who goes back in time would actually look a little bit abnormally good looking because his teeth are done, and he's probably shampooed his hair. You know what I mean. If we actually went back to that time, because of the lack of pharmaceuticals, etc.,
Right.
they would appear differently. So we would appear differently. So in character development, in all of the books that I've been reading, it's about really learning how they developed each character, and then try and do that as best I can myself. Because otherwise, a character appears two-dimensional. You have to understand why that person behaves that way, why that person looks that way, and look at people interacting. There's a good quote which says, "Take your main character and follow them." That's what a writer does,
Right.
and but you have to know what your main character is and who he is. You don't want to go too much into the past. I mean, you don't want to go silly, but at the same time, you have to understand why they would react that way. So that they have to be developed. So for me, character development is a major issue when it comes to the main characters of the book.
Nice. And it kind of always remind me of something, especially for time travels, which I didn't bring that up, but I think it's really important because, as you said before early on, that you want to be accurate as possible. And I remember this, I don't know where I heard this, but I remember, I think it was a professor who said, if you looked at history and you actually went back, we would think we would be someone different. But would we, though? I mean, if we went back in time as who we were, with what we are in this day and age, would we do things differently in the past? No, we probably would be ourselves at that time. And I think that's
Yeah.
really important to look at, especially if you say, let's say, if you were put in the American South during the 1670s. And if you were in the American South, part of a major plantation, more than likely you would probably not free your slaves. You would probably still own them. And that really makes you consider about who you are as a person. Would you have done it? Maybe you would have, maybe you wouldn't. That
Yeah.
really had to do like a reflection. And that goes back into like the whole time travel thing that you said. You want to be accurate as possible to saying, how would we, genuinely we, in the present, act in the past? We would probably be seen as maybe witches. We would probably be seen as like heathens or demons with this knowledge, our technology. And if we were in the Byzantine times, because our stature is a lot bigger, we're a lot broader, they would assume we are probably from the north, especially if you are the Byzantine kings. You probably would have had the Varangian guards, who were primarily from the north, and they were described as very big, broad, facial hair, very striking features. You would look somewhat abnormal or not human to them, even though you both are humans, but you don't look like a typical person in 11th century Constantinople or 12th century Cairo or anywhere at the time.
Yeah, and that's why if you were actually looking at sending someone back 1,000 years, you would have to look at their appearance in order to make sure that they fit in with what you would expect. One of the issues is one of the trainers was of what we call today's Middle Eastern extraction, and he wasn't able to go back to the Saxon times because he would have looked too different. For the next mission, for the mission to Istanbul, the Byzantine Empire, they selected members of the Turkish special forces, but they had to have a certain appearance because, remember, because of the migrations through the Islamic conquest over time, it's brought different ethnic groups in. Whereas traditionally Greeks were redheads and blondes, and so you had to be careful that you didn't pick someone who could have been perceived as a potential enemy to go back into your say wander through Istanbul looking like somebody who should be sort of turfed out and maybe even killed. So the other thing too, when you're talking about character development, it's thinking that the people in historical times, even though we glamorize them, they're still people.
Right.
So they still have their ways. You're looking at a Saxon, even though he's got his sakes, the knife that all of them wore. He wasn't a barbarian. He was trying to look after his wife and kids and grow enough crops, and they had similar issues. Just within their cultural framework, just within they didn't have books. They generally they didn't read generally. So they would. It's about developing people to be people, like you say, precisely that. How would you react if you were in Istanbul? How would you react if you were in Constantinople? Sorry, at the time,
right?
And then you've got to look at. Sewage, you've got to look at water, you've got to look at food, you've got to look at what food was eaten, how did people use their toilets, Were there
Right.
profits? So they're all things that we have to take into account.
Right.
What were the smells? How good was the clothing? So all of that sort of thing is to be researched ad infinitum and until it becomes just part of your history.
Definitely. And speaking of research, and I think that's one thing we definitely need to talk about is definitely for you getting your book published. Now, in our pre-record session, you talked about being a self-published author. So, how did that whole process and decision come about? Because from my experience talking with others who take the self-published route, it has its own set challenges and kind of their own misconceptions. So, from your experience, how did that whole process go about? And did you initially want to publish through a traditional or hybrid publishing house? And what was that experience like?
I think every author wants to be a highly paid best-selling author.
Yes.
We all do. We all want to be discovered. But in today's publishing world, it becomes more and more difficult. It becomes more and more problematic. And in my desire to be accepted in a traditional publication framework, I became easy prey to what I call, anyway, there's the vanity publishers.
Right.
And the vanity publishers say to you, hey, you pay us this money and we will not only publish you, but we'll do everything for you. We'll make you a bestseller. You pay them the money, they give you some books, and you can hear the crickets because nothing's happening. So my experience wasn't good. And I won't mention the vanity publisher, but I would for each of you who might be considering, as a writer, considering publication, stay away from vanity publishers. They're not going to do you any good. They are a business, and their business model is to take money off you. And then, if they do happen to sell any, they take something like an enormous amount. And then when you finally get your royalty check. In Australia, they don't even, but banks don't process checks. So the only way you get a check, if you get a processed check, it has to be something like thousands of dollars. So you get a little royalty check, which is useless because the banks don't even process it. So not only do you have you're being scammed. So that's my opinion. Stay away from them. The decision to become self-published took place when I actually spoke to a lady who fills the role of an author's guide, so to speak. Her name is Claire Placestead. She's a New Zealander, and she owns a company called Placestead Publishing. She's an owner-operator. She's actually hearing impaired, and she is an absolutely lovely lady. And what she does is she can edit, but she basically formats your manuscript, formats the image, and that allows you then to publish on KDP and through Smashwords and everything else, which essentially costs you nothing. Then you have the long and winding road, which is promoting yourself, and I have written to literally hundreds of agents and literally, dozens of publishers. And because I perceive myself to be one of a massive authors out there trying to get attention, you have to do something pretty different, or you have to be already famous in order to get their attention. So that's my perception. That's my perception of it. So once you're published, then you have to self-promote, and I really don't like that. I'm not very good at getting up and saying, look at me, I'm great, look at me. So I do use social media. I actually use a software called Hootsuite, which allows me to put three social media messages a day and then pre-do them for 7 days. So and I have have my strategy on this is the first message is about writing. The second message is my comment on today's events, which may not be controversial. And the third comment then is a picture of somebody with my book talking about writing my book. So,
oh yeah, I've seen those. I actually love the smiles of people on faces, and your cartoons. They're a little chuckle. I like getting those chuckles every now and then. It's a nice
thank you.
little distraction away from the modern world.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's a difficult thing, and let's be blunt. As an author, your work. I don't believe that J.K. Rowling would have been published if she was today. Why do I believe that? She was a single mum. She had no money, so she wouldn't have been able to go through a vanity publisher, and certainly she. For whatever reason, wouldn't probably attract the attention because agents and publishers want a sure thing. So that's my bugbear.
Right.
But at the same time, what do? You just keep going and you keep trying and talk to lovely people like yourself and hope that somebody out there finds your books interesting and reads them.
Definitely, 100% agree. And that's true at the end of the day, that ultimately as authors, we want our books to have an audience, have a following, no matter how big or small. That just tells us, we're doing good. And it kind of leads into a very important question, which is, who have been your biggest supporters? And have you ever had that sense of validation from other authors who may have read your books telling you, we love what you're doing, you belong in this community?
My biggest supporters, I suppose, have been family and friends, and I'm grateful for that. Then when I speak with people who I don't know, who've read my books and go, "Oh, you're so and so. I really liked your book. That is just bam. That is just fabulous." Or when you've got somebody who you barely know who hears about you, gets your book, and then they contact you and say, "I really, really enjoyed it." So it's like a stone in a pond, isn't it? There's a ripple effect and it goes out. I have fans. I didn't believe that, but I do. I've got a few. I can't say there's a lot, but I have a few who like my work and say, "Well, great. I'm looking forward to reading your latest book." Wow, but I always want more. So I think one of the biggest things, Gabe, in the writing community is actually overcoming your own fears and overcoming your own self-doubts and your own self-deprecation. Am I good enough? Is my book good enough?
Right.
And also not to look like a tosser in running around saying, I'm the best, aren't I wonderful, I'm the best, because there's nobody who's the best. And
right.
So in the end, I think the biggest challenge is overcoming your own fears and feeling that, hey, my work is good enough, somebody will like it. And when somebody gets back and says they do like it, that's an enormous validation. Did I answer the question?
Yes, you answered it beautifully. And you kind of also answered my final question, which is, with everything that you've gone through, with everything that you have learned, what is your word of wisdom to the fellow authors out there that want to begin writing? They have that idea in their head, but they don't know if they should do it. What is your word of wisdom to them?
Start. Do it. Writing is like cooking. The more you do it, the better you get. And first off, some of the things you may create may stink or may get burned, but the more you do it, the better you get. And that's the joy of writing, in that you can edit, and you do. You go back and you re-edit and you re-edit again. But the most important thing is to start. Take that idea and put it down on paper, put it on your computer. Look at everything that is around you and see how that can apply to your own story. Take notes, record conversations. and then keep it going, but don't be frightened of going back and rewriting the whole thing, because boy golly, that's what being a writer is all about,
Oh
isn't
yeah, I know
it?
that from experience. It's kind of painful, but you definitely can see there's a difference in your writing when you first started. Like my
Absolutely.
writing initially for the summoning is different from my other current book now, The Failed Quest, about the Japanese invasion of Korea in the late 1500s.
Right.
That's drastically different, and that does show you how much you have change as an author, because you're not the same person anymore. And I
No.
think that's what shows. And honestly, what you said, writing is like cooking, I've never heard that comparison, but I think it is true. Well, I will say this. It's almost kind of not like cooking, because unlike cooking, you can't take stuff out because you have to redo it again. With writing,
Exactly.
you can. But
Yeah.
I get what you mean, and it is true. And I definitely think what you said, Rob, is very important, and even more important of going back and changing something. Even if you have finished it, if you think it's 100% good and you like it, look at it with clear eyes and see it again, because
You
it's
leave
probably
it
not
for a
the
couple of
same.
months. You leave it for a couple of months, and you go back and you go, "Oh my God!" And it's always good to have somebody on your team who's good at editing. My wife, she man, that's a weird thing to say. We've been together for 8 years, and we only got married about 3 weeks ago, and it's kind of funny because I'm not used to that. But anyway, she's very good at reading things and going, "Did you know that in this paragraph you've used the word beautiful 3 times?" You go, "Ugh." How did that get
Oh,
past? And remember too, writers, nothing is 100% perfect. Every
no.
writer, everywhere. Um, do you find, Gabe, that I read books now, and half of me is editing it, and you're sort of going, "Oh, there's a typo there," "Oh, there," and this is somebody,
Yes.
or
Or space is too close together when it's not supposed to be, and it's
yeah,
like, why?
or you go, "Oh, where was that going?" It's interesting how we can pick fault with everyone else's work as well as our own, but that's part of the cross we bear. Maybe I just wanted to make a comment. My son, he's a musician, and he's quite good. He's been on the radio a couple of times, and he has his fan base. And like most musicians, he also has a full-time job. And he said to me that. He said, "Dad, treat your writing like I treat my music." He said, "Treat it as a hobby that you enjoy. And if anything else comes of it, then that's what happens." And perhaps that's my piece of advice. Write, enjoy it, get your story out there. You're still making a mark on the world, but don't try and make a living out of it yet.
Yes, that is probably the truest thing, because writing is fun, but it definitely takes a lot of work. You definitely have to show who you are. Definitely have your thing on the side that's going to keep you financially stable. And when you've written enough to where at the point, okay, maybe I can slowly give a little bit more time to writing, to the point where, okay, now I can be a full time writer, as opposed to
Yeah,
saying, oh, I got a book out, I can be a full time writer. No,
no.
because you need to pay the bills, you need to pay everything. And I think what you said, that is a huge important thing.
Yeah,
Definitely treat it as a passion, as a hobby, and give time to consider it being something you want to do in the future, but definitely keep your current job as a
yeah.
way to make money.
That
Because
way, then your heart won't be broken. What do you
yes,
call it? I think it's an American term, your side hustle. Make
yes, your
writing your
side
side
hustle.
hustle.
Oh man. Well, Rob, we've reached the end of the interview. This has probably been the best one I've had so far for season 3. Thank you so much for joining.
My
And
pleasure.
where can people find you if they want to learn more about you, learn more about your books? I understand you have a website, correct?
Yeah, I do. And it does need a bit of a polish. My name is Rob Shackleford, and so my website is www.robshackleford.com. Also, please do the usual social media thing. The hardest thing about my name is spelling it, especially if you've had a few drinks. So you know, if you could follow me on social media, that'd be great. And go to my website. But the books are available, of course, through the usual outlets, through Amazon and Smashwords and Drafter Digital and all those. And if they're not, I would certainly appreciate your letting me know.
Nice. Well, listeners, this concludes another fantastic interview. I want to thank again Rob for joining us. And as he said, all of his works are on his website as well as Amazon, Barnes Noble, and other sites. I will link those in the description of this episode today, as well as LinkedIn account, so you can message him personally. Again, Rob, thank you so much for joining us. I wish you a wonderful rest of the morning, and thank you for being an awesome guest.
Thank you, sir, and have a great day.
You as well, and